They told me I didn't belong here, that the lake my family had lived beside for generations wasn't really ours. It was theirs. At first, it was whispers, then glares, and then the construction started. Cabin after cabin, 139 of them, built right on top of the water that held my childhood memories. I watched it all disappear brick by brick as if my history meant nothing. But they never expected me to fight back. And when the moment came, I pulled the lever. Would you have done the same? Like and subscribe to join our community. For as long as I can remember, that lake was more than just water to me. It was home. My grandparents built a small wooden dock there decades ago, long before luxury developers or neighborhood associations even knew the place existed. Summers meant fishing at sunrise. Winters meant skating when the ice thickened, and every season carried echoes of my family's laughter. It wasn't just land, it was legacy. But in towns like ours, legacy didn't always protect you, especially if your skin color made you different. We weren't the wealthiest family, and we weren't the most influential, but we were the ones who had always belonged. Still, I noticed how neighbors spoke about us with clipped tones, how officials treated our claims with less urgency, how rules seemed to bend for some but tighten around us. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself it was small-town politics, the kind everyone endures. But then I began hearing rumors, developers eyeing the lake, whispers of improvement projects, even casual comments like, "It's not like they're really using the land the way it should be." It stung. Because those words weren't about the land. They were about us. And then one morning the trucks rolled in. Surveyors staked out lines right across the edge of our dock as if we were invisible. No phone call, no warning. Just the sharp sound of hammers and saws cutting through the silence of the lake I once thought untouchable. I should have stopped them right there. But part of me believed it was just temporary, that it couldn't possibly go as far as it did. I was wrong. At first, I thought maybe the construction was just temporary, maybe new docks or some maintenance project. But within weeks, the outlines of cabins began to appear. 1, then 10, then row after row of cookie-cutter buildings, each rising like a monument to the erasure of everything my family had built. When I asked the developers for answers, they brushed me off with practiced smiles. The land was rezoned, they said. Public interest takes priority. But I knew the truth. Our voices hadn't been included in those meetings. My name, my family's history, none of it was on their radar. It was as if generations of us had never existed, and it wasn't just the land they were taking. Every day I watched as construction workers left trash by the water's edge, tore down old oak trees where my grandfather once sat with me, and polluted the shoreline with oil and debris. I tried reporting it, but the officials who should have listened treated me like a nuisance. They said the cabins would bring prosperity, that I should be thankful for progress. Progress for who? Certainly not for us. The worst part wasn't even the physical destruction. It was the subtle reminders that this wasn't our lake anymore. I overheard new buyers saying things like, "I can't believe they let people like that live here so long," as if we were intruders in the home my family created. The homeowners association formed overnight, stacked with board members who looked nothing like me and had no interest in hearing my concerns. Every letter I wrote was ignored. Every meeting I tried to attend ended with me being talked over or dismissed. One man even leaned close and whispered, "You don't really belong here, you know." It was the same old story. Dressed up in contracts and bylaws, racism hiding behind paperwork. Still, I refused to give in. I started gathering documents, old deeds, historical surveys, and even photographs of my family on the dock from decades past. If they wanted to erase us, I would force them to see the truth. But each time I brought evidence forward, the board found a new excuse. One day it was zoning codes. Another, a lack of clarity in ownership records. It was endless walls, built not of brick but of bureaucracy. As the cabins multiplied, 50, 70, 100, the lake became unrecognizable. What was once a peaceful refuge now echoed with the sounds of engines, drunken parties, and the laughter of people who looked right through me. My family stopped visiting. Friends avoided the place altogether, and I stood there alone, watching as the very heart of my life was stolen in broad daylight. But I wasn't finished, not yet. Because buried in those stacks of legal documents was one clause, one overlooked line that held more power than they could ever imagine. I didn't fully understand it at first, but as I pieced it together, I realized it might be the lever that could bring everything crashing down. And once I pulled it, there would be no turning back. The day the final cabin was completed, I felt something inside me snap. Our lake was gone. The water was choked with boats, the shoreline littered with fences and signs that read, "Private property." They had taken everything, and still, they looked at me as if I were trespassing on my own land. That afternoon, I tried once more to speak at the board meeting. I carried my grandfather's deed, the weathered paper that proved our claim went back generations. I placed it on the table, my hands trembling with rage, but the chairman didn't even glance at it. Instead, he smirked and said, "That's sentimental. But the future doesn't belong to you." The room erupted in laughter. People nodded, whispered, and shook their heads at me like I was some foolish relic of the past. And in that moment, I understood. They would never see me as equal. No document, no plea, no history mattered. Because to them, I wasn't just outnumbered, I was invisible. But what they didn't know was that I had discovered the clause buried deep in their own charter, a clause that gave me power, the kind of power they thought I'd never find. My heart pounded as I read it aloud, my voice echoing through the room. Silence fell. For the first time, their smug smiles faltered. The clause was simple. If the board acted without unanimous consent from all legacy landholders, any construction, any decision was invalid. And I was the last legacy landholder. Their cabins, their profits, their empire on my lake could all vanish with a single stroke. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was it, the turning point. Years of being silenced, dismissed, erased had led to this exact instant. They wanted me to disappear. Instead, I was about to erase everything they had built. I took a deep breath, my hand hovering over the lever of justice I had unearthed. And as their eyes widened in panic, I pulled it. When I pulled that lever, the ripple was immediate. The cabins, the contracts, the very foundation of their empire collapsed under the weight of their own arrogance. One by one, the structures they had built without my consent were declared illegal. The lake, scarred and wounded, was set on the path to restoration. And for the first time in years, I felt the air shift, not in my favor, but in the favor of justice. But it wasn't just about reclaiming water and land. It was about reclaiming dignity. For so long, they treated me as if my history, my identity, my existence didn't matter. And yet one overlooked clause reminded them, and reminded me, that being silenced doesn't mean being powerless. Still, I couldn't help but reflect on the bitter truth. Why did it take a legal technicality for them to hear what I had been saying all along? Why was my voice only valid when hidden in paperwork? That's the deeper wound racism leaves. It tells you that your truth doesn't count until it's backed by something they recognize. The lake will heal. Time will wash away the scars left behind, but the memory of their laughter, the dismissiveness, the way they looked at me as though I was a trespasser in my own legacy, that doesn't fade easily. It lingers, a reminder of how fragile justice can be and how easily people erase what they don't respect. So I ask you, what would you have done? If generations of your family's history were treated as worthless, would you have stayed silent? Or would you have pulled the lever too? Because in the end, silence doesn't protect you. Action does, and sometimes one act of defiance can echo louder than centuries of erasure. If centuries of your history were dismissed in the blink of an eye, would you fight to preserve it or let it vanish in silence? Share your truth, because the fight against injustice begins with stories like ours. If this story touched you, don't just watch, be part of the change. Hit subscribe and join our community of voices that matter.